and welcome to A3 Politics on A3 Royal and Media Marketing page and channel. Hi, I'm Opeyemi B. Awolere. I'll be your anchor for today's program. I have a popular royal and religious father in the building, a prince and a good son of the soil, my father in Christ, Archbishop Prince Ayo Oladigbolu. You are welcome on board, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay, sir. Can you please tell us about yourself, your background, and work experience?
I was born in Oyo on June 27, 1938. My direct parents were Prince Alhaji Raji Ake Oladigbolu, and my mother Ayoma Muniratu Aderonke Ajoke Oladigbolu ní Adéyẹmọ. Of course, you know both of them are born and bred in Oyo. And I grew up within the Obayaritan compound in the palace of Oyo. And of course, there was an extension to Obayaritan compound, which was built adjoining Madarikan. So I sort of had two residences. So I'm trying to tell you as much about myself so that anybody who wants to find out more would at least would know that I was a thorough bred Oyo person. And growing up in those two premises gave me great exposure to the goings on in the palace.
Okay.
Because every Jimoh Oloyin, they would take me from the Obayaritan residence outside the palace to greet Kábíyèsí Ikú Abayeyi, the Aláàfin Ọba Ṣìyánbọ́lá Oníkẹ̀pẹ́ Oladigbolu. And I would sit on his laps, and he would give me gifts that would be taken with me back into the compound. So that was my growing up. Later, I was sent to the Quranic and Arabic school, primarily first at Elega, because there was a great Alpha, my teacher, who was also a carpenter but a learned man of God. And that's where I started my Quranic and Arabic education. And after a long while, I was withdrawn from Elega and moved to Sarumi. And of course, Sarumi was closer to the palace because it is located right next to Olorieru compound and opposite Udepanu in the palace. So it was more convenient for me to attend the school, the Arabic and Islamic training school at Sarumi, from either the palace or from Obayaritan compound where we resided. So that was my beginning until around 1952, when one of my uncles decided that I just needed to go to school, to the regular school. And Baba Adebimpe persuaded my father to release me and Tafa Adegia of the Alayo royal household to him, so that we could go to the regular school, and himself being a teacher in the local authority school in Oyo, took both of us to that school. But because of my advanced age and whatever the teachers found, they didn't allow me to start in primary one. I started my primary school education in standard one of those days, which meant they allowed me to skip 2 years and move ahead. And so that indeed helped my education, because it gave it the necessary speed, so that I was ahead of those who were supposed to be my classmates by 2 years. And luckily, I did well in school. And I want to really attribute that to God and to my Islamic and Arabic training background, because I believe that has already prepared me adequately. It has sharpened my brains, and my brain, it has prepared me adequately, if you like, academically, for the regular school. By 1955, when the free primary education scheme was gaining ground, I became the publicity officer for free education, especially in the Saleoyo area, because when they were sensitizing the public, they chose me, my school chose me, my headmaster, to be the one who will advocate publicly. And so they will put me on the desk. Another student will carry the desk, we have the school band and all the school children, and we paraded the entire area from where that school is located near Koso to Asipa Market, stopping at various locations, and they will put me on the desk, and I will sing Ekoni Osole Yide Kowe. That song I now later transferred to the Aláàfin that Láyíwọlá ti sọ̀yọ́ dèkó fún wa.
Okay.
But that was the sound God gave me in 1955 while I was still in the primary school. Ẹ̀kọ́ ni ó sọ lẹ̀ yídè kó òwe, ó sọ Ṣákí dílé o, ó sọ Ìbàdàn dọjà, ẹ̀kọ́ ni ó sọ lẹ̀ yídè kó òwe. That was the song I was teaching my other pupils, children in the primary school, and adults were singing it with us, and they were bringing their children to come and enjoy the free universal education that Chief Obafemi Awolowo introduced to Western region at that time. So by 1957, I had completed my primary school education and went further to Doba, LA's modern school, and to God's glory, I think we did so well there too, that every week, Mr. I think his name was Ojetola, was the literature and English language teacher. He was always reading my essay at the school assembly. So something, God has used those backgrounds, the Islamic and Arabic school training, the preparation in the Saleoyo, and I need to remind you too, that at the Saleoyo LA school, I was the editor of the school magazine too. Yeah, we had foolscap papers, and I would interview people, I would collect stories of what's happening to parents and students and teachers, and I would write them all out and paste them on the notice board. And I was compelled to do that every two months of the year, from 1955 to 1957. So I was, and I don't know, God was preparing me for a future in journalism, in which I got a degree, and public speaking, which later I found was useful for me as a preacher. So all these things had been happening from the very beginning of my life. After the modern school education, of course, I had a brief stint in teaching, unqualified teacher kind of teaching, but that was very brief, because it was during my brief experience in teaching at Akinwumi village in Iseyin that I encountered Jesus Christ, that I met a brother who knew Jesus so well and whose life was so infectious that I wanted to have what he had. Of course, remember, I had already been brought up in Islam. I had been deep in the knowledge. Indeed, I had, from Sarumi, I had gone through the basic Quranic training. I had done the Wolimat. And it was only left for me to go to the translation stage when I left to go to the regular school. So, and I encountered this radiant life of a Christian. I had been a God-fearer all my life, being brought up in Islam, and having such a strong background and preparation and training. But I wanted more, and I could see that my encounter with Jesus provided that more. It added that extra value of spirituality to my life, that I decided to stick by him. And of course, I hid that well from everybody, so that I made sure nobody saw me going to church, whenever I came home, until one day. And the Methodist church used to be at Timber, not where it is now in Oyo. So I sneaked into that church one day, and some people at the Timber market who had known me, and I must draw back a little, because in all those days that I was in the modern school, I was also the interpreter and reader for Bolaji Akewe's disciple, who was coming to Oyo to preach. And I was always reading the Bible for him to counter the Christians who came to debate with him. So a lot of people knew me in this community. They knew me as a very strong person of faith. So they could not believe it, that suddenly something has happened to me, and now I was a Christian. And so it was difficult for the community to accept that reality. And so somebody saw me sneak into the Timber Methodist Church then, and went home and reported to my dad. And so when I came back home that day, the first question was, where have you been? And the Spirit of God just gave me the courage to say, well, I'm coming back from church. And the fellow said, well, you better go back there, because you don't belong here. In this place, we don't go to church, we go to the mosque. We are believers in God, and you cannot bring such disgrace upon this family. And so I was in a great dilemma, and having no place to go to, I had to roam the streets, finding people to help me placate my justifiably angry dad. And thank God, my greater dad, my granddad then, Kábíyèsí Babaye Ọba Oladigbolu II, was on the throne. And my conversion to Christianity became the talk of the town, because it was difficult for people to believe that I, who had been the interpreter and helper for Bolaji Akewe's disciple, could suddenly turn. And a lot of people believe that it must have been a kind of derangement, or that some people had bewitched me, because that was my mother's conviction, because she kept praying and looking around for help to remove the bewitchment, that some people must have bewitched me to have turned my head so that I would have turned my back on a faith, a religion that I had embraced from my childhood. But then it was the Spirit of God that was working. And when the heat was too much for me in Oyo, my uncle then was a minister, Honorable S.A. Adeniya. He was a minister in Ibadan. He lived at Oshotokun Road in Bodija. So he was more sympathetic because he himself had converted. He used to be Shitu. Now he has become Samuel. So he was practically the only one who was very sympathetic to my cause. And so he allowed me to relocate to his place in Ibadan. But my matter was reported in the palace because of the closeness between my dad and the Kabiyesi. And so the Kabiyesi, the Aláàfin, now sent Baale I think it's KDG, or I don't remember the Baale of Fiditi at that time, to trace me to Bodija and to bring me home, to convince my uncle, Honorable Adeniya, to release me because they needed to interrogate me in the palace. I think they were more concerned as to my sanity, whether I was still sane to have converted or to become a Christian, considering my deep background in my former religion. And I came, and a large group was assembled in the palace to interview me. And after they had asked me what pushed me, why did you do what you did, we had you are going to church and all this. Suddenly I just lost consciousness. And they told me later that I spoke for about 30 minutes, explaining to them what I had come to understand of the Christian faith and the impact of the Spirit of God on my life, and how there was going to be no turning back for me from following Jesus Christ. And there were a lot of wailing when I sort of became conscious of my surrounding again. And there were a lot of wailing and a lot of cursing because people just could not understand. And to some of them, they thought the bewitchment must have taken deeper roots inside of my body, to the point that what I was saying, they could not understand. But they saw me, they knew I was sincere about what I said to them, even though it was contrary to their own concepts and beliefs. And they released me and asked my daddy to take me home and take care of me. And I understood that to mean go and look after him. If he needed medical attention or spiritual healing or something, you go and take care of it. And later on, we will invite him back. But since I didn't feel like he was unwilling to take me home, and so they let me go back to Ibadan. And I went back to Daddy Shegun, who is my uncle, Honorable Adeniya, and remained at Oshotokun Avenue for some time. When they invited me back, obviously, Kabiyesi, the Aláàfin, had made some investigations of his own. By that time, my mother was running helter-skelter, looking for help to ward off the curse or the bewitchment. When I came back, and they asked me the same questions, and the answers were the same, then I was told point blank that I will have to find for myself another family, because what I had become was a disgrace to the royal family, the Oladigbolu royal family, to which I belonged. To God's glory, the late Reverend Oladigbolu was the Methodist minister and superintendent of Oyo in those days. And it was Steve Abolode who took me up and sent me to Ilorin with late Reverend Dr. Bayo Akinlawo, because at that time I lost interest in teaching. All I wanted to do was preach. I wanted to sing. I wanted to preach. I didn't want to do anything else. And so Baba Olude said, since you have been converted and God is calling you to be a preacher, an evangelist, you have to get some training. And that's why he sent me with a bio and one Matthew Ogunsola from Kumosho to the UMS Theological College in Ilorin, where I spent 3 years acquiring training for evangelism, training for pastoral work, and church leadership. And but before that event, I need to go back a little bit and recall that as a young man in Oyo, growing up, not only was I the publicity officer for pre-primary education, but when the social welfare department in Oyo also took off, they found me a very available and ready partner while I was in the modern school. And so they used some of us to start the Federation of Boys and Girls Clubs in Oyo. Myself, late Prince Sikiru Owade of Agure, and then late Saka Folani of Magba, who in his lifetime also became the principal private secretary to Alaafin, were among the earliest group of young people in Oyo that were spotted and used by the Ministry of Social Welfare and Community Development. And eventually, they elected me the first president for Oyo Division, Federation of Boys and Girls Clubs. And part of our activities, apart from my physical exercises, boxing, running, and all this, was also drama and singing and drumming. And so I led the Oyo divisional team in 1961 to the Festival of Arts in Ibadan with Salawu Ojuabo as our lead singer. And we won second place for Oyo division during that festival. So my interest in Oyo, in Yoruba culture, had started from home and from my growing up in the palace. And growing up in the palace of Oyo, living in the Oba Henrietta compound, having access to all the festivals and ceremonies taking place in the palace. And luckily for me, after the passing of Oladigbolu, during my time in Sarumi, I met Lamidi Ijebu, who was a younger brother of Ayaba Sariyu Ijebu, Ayaba of Alaafin Alhaji Adeniran. And so that gave me also free access to the palace during that period. And of course, when my own papa, Oba Bello Gadigeshi, came to the throne, I lived virtually in the palace. And the younger children that came into the palace with Papa, apart from late Mrs. Adeyemi, Princess Toro, the younger children, Silifa and Wasiu, they were all, we took care of them, myself and Adetayo, Gadigeshi. So I had been part and parcel of that palace since my childhood. And of course, when Oba Olaiwola Adeyemi came to the throne, I also lived off and on in the palace, helping the community and assisting the king and serving the best interest of everybody as much as I could. So that's my growing up. And from Ilorin, I was posted to Borgu because people wanted, I think the church wanted to be sure that this Oyo prince was just not deceiving them about his being called by God. And so they sent me to one of the most difficult areas of service where you have to adapt and really become like the people. But because the call of God on my life was total service, I spent like in that area, and the church grew. A lot of development took place. Our medical services sprang up and did well. We also started an agricultural project for the Methodist Church that is still there till today. And I'm talking of 1966 till date. And I know from information available that whenever my name is mentioned in Kayama, where I primarily resided, and the surrounding villages, people still have clear recollection of an Oyo prince who once came there as an evangelist. So it was from there that the church now said, well, we know that you are truly called of God. We will send you for further training to become a minister proper. All these years I was doing everything as an evangelist. It was during that same time that I started reading my Ewi on Radio Elwa Ibadan. And it's on record that I am the pioneer Christian Ewi chanter to do Christian Ewi on radio. That's not in dispute at all. And so from Kayama, from Borogu, the church now sent me to Ibadan, Emmanuel College, where I was taking courses of the University of Ibadan, Department of Religious Studies, as well as that of Emmanuel College of Theology. So when I finished, I got certificates, both of the University of Ibadan and that of Emmanuel College. And I believe that my performance was impressive enough that the authorities now facilitated a scholarship for me to go to the United States of America, to Southern Methodist University to study. And I concentrated my studies in theology in the areas of social ethics, as well as I took part in a global competition for a fellowship in religious journalism. And I was the only student, the only person picked from among like 60 contestants from throughout the world. And so I got that Ralph Studi fellowship for religious journalism. The chair of that committee was from Columbia University. I was in Dallas, in Southern Methodist, but they chose me. And because of my previous experience here in Nigeria as a stringer for Tribune and Daily Service, my work with Awureri, Ministry of Education, and my work in radio and television, so all this packed together qualified me for that prestigious award that enabled me to study and get a degree, another degree in mass communication in 1977, after which I came back to Nigeria. And the church decided to post me to its seminary in Shagamu. So I was principal of the Methodist Theological Institute, Shagamu, for like 6-7 years, and resurrected the school because it had been virtually almost closed down. And now today it is Methodist Theological Institute, known throughout the world. And of course, in gratitude to God, they've named their refectory, their dining hall, after me. They did that 2 years ago, and we all went from Oyo here to celebrate that. So from there I was elected bishop, and I was sent to Ekiti. And at that time I was covering all of Ondo and the present Ekiti state for the Methodist Church as a bishop. And then later on I was translated to Ibadan diocese, and today there is a building standing in my name, Archbishop Oladigbolu House, within the premises of the Methodist Mission headquarters in Ibadan. To God's glory, that came about because of the way God enabled us to handle His work, His mission, and to achieve good results for the church. So it was from Ibadan that I was also given further promotion in the church. We call it preferment, and I was made an archbishop and translated from Ibadan to Ilesha, which is the headquarters. And I had 6-7 bishops working with me, and my jurisdiction covered all of Edo and Delta, all of Kogi, Ondo, Ondo, Kwara, and Osun State. And that's where I was until 2005, when I voluntarily retired. 3 years before my age of 70, the Lord told me enough is enough. I should return to Oyo and give the rest of my life in the service of my community. And I wrote that in my letter to the authorities of Methodist Church, that I was retiring voluntarily because God has told me I should go back to my own home and help that community as much as I can. And they were reluctant to accept my letter of voluntary retirement. But after a while, the head of the church then, Dr. Sunday Bank, His Eminence, said, yes, I know Oladigbolu, you are a man of conviction, and you are a man of resolution, and we have no doubt that you have a mission to offer to your community. We will release you reluctantly. And that's what they did. And so since 2005, I have returned to Oyo, and I've done nothing else but help this community in the little ways that I can. So that's my brief story that you've asked me to tell.